I'm very ready to record this amazing first episode for you guys.
This is the very first episode of What on Earth podcast. I'm Veronica and my co-host is Tika. And we just want to tell you about stuff we can't shut up about.
Especially earth science, but any science that involves fun facts about the world.
We know each other since masters in earth science. Then I picked up PhD at ETH in Zurich. And you, Tika?
Yes, I went for work for a year as a environmental consultant, and I figured out I hated working full time at an office. So I studied again the second master's science education and communication at Utrecht University because I'm from the Netherlands, so that was easy to combine with my job.
Yeah, the main idea about the podcast was just generally have fun and to share the things we learned over our university time. But the fact that it's been some time since we graduated, it's been 5 years for you, Tika.
Yep.
It's been less than a year for me because I finished my PhD in 2024 in December, but I've been not actively doing science for the last 2 years. And but we still somehow talk about it. So we said that maybe let's do podcast.
Yep. I have a lot of people asking as well about climate change. Like, is that true? And how does it work? And especially with this Earth Overshoot Day being earlier and earlier every year. And people always tend to come to me and ask about it. And I'm like, well, let me explain. I'm ready.
Yeah, so I'm not a climate person. I'm more a rock person and planet person. But yeah, Tika, you are paleo person, right?
Yes, I'm here for everything that's already happened. So we tend to look at the history to predict the future in our science. And I'm more of a science education and communication person.
And I think science communication fits perfectly with our first episode. And we'll be talking about languages and how did it lead to the fact that we both speak English, because English is not my native language. It's also not your native language. But somehow through university, we were forced to use English.
That sounds so bad, forced to use English.
It's gonna get worse if you think about we could have speaking like French or German.
I'm not sure that's better though. Yeah, so we're talking about the language of science, how did it develop over time, and what we can, still see from that now.
Yeah, so we are just bunch of nerds, and it's sometimes hard to understand us, right? Especially when we are in our element. So like, I will paint you a picture, if you will.
Oh,
so you
please do.
a girl, and she wants to meet your university friend. You say yes, and she drags you to a niche pub, because we always tend to gather in some very niche pub.
I like where this is going.
And there is, in the darkness, bunch of nerds. You order your beer, you introduce yourself, you make yourself comfortable, and you start to listen. And in about 2 minutes' time, you find yourself questioning, what on earth are they talking about? Because, like, even though they speak the same language, they speak English, right? You understand nothing or close to nothing. You can make out the specific words and terms, but the common denominator is missing. And the common denominator is science. Have you ever experienced that? Because I did.
This sounds like other friends of mine talking about football and me just sitting there not understanding anything.
Yeah, I think this is also a very good point, because maybe that's not specific to science. It's just specific to a group of people being wrapped into certain topic. And if you bring outsider to it, it can very quickly become overwhelming for that person, I guess.
Yeah, I think every interest or personal story or hobby even has its own language.
Yeah. I mean, it's not even like not specific for earth scientists, because every time I'm at a conference and I want to support one of my friends from a different discipline, it's totally the same. Like, I roughly understand the outline of the topic, but I don't understand the specifics. Like, if I would to listen your defense, Tika, I would probably understand like 20%. I would understand the main points, but I would not understand the specifics. And I don't know, you've been at my PhD defense. You can maybe share how did it go for you?
Yeah, we actually made a bet with some friends at the beginning how much we would understand. I bet myself at 20%. They were disappointed. It was less. Yeah.
Yeah.
You are definitely a different kind of smart than I am.
Yeah, but then I was like super flexing, right? It was not even, I don't think, in theory, it's supposed to be for broad audience, but if you have to squeeze all of your research you've done over the past 5 years, because it's been 5 years for my PhD, for half an hour lecture and to impress external committee and show what is very important, it's kind of impossible to not sound posh and jargony.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
yeah.
But it also depends on the audience you're catering to, right? It makes sense to be more sciencey. You use your jargon in that
Yes,
setting.
definitely. Definitely. It's quite fascinating, the whole development of scientific language. And I did a small research and went down the rabbit hole about the history of the scientific language. And specifically, I was using book, which I would recommend. It's called Scientific Babel: How Science Was Done Before and After Global English. And it's written by Michael Gordon. I hope I did not butcher his last name. I did my best.
So you are referring to the language science is shared in, right? Not
Yes,
specifically jargon, because that's
not
a whole different
specifically
story.
jargon. This is totally different. We're going to be talking about it probably throughout, but generally I was quite interested. How did it happen that it settled on English, and why the English we are using is so different from the English we are speaking with our friends?
Yeah, very different.
Very different. So the first part is, of course, focused on Latin, because I think quite a few people will know that Latin was prevailing as a scientific language.
Frame are we speaking now? Like 1500s, 14, even earlier, later?
So we start with the medieval time up to 17th century. This is the time when the Latin was mostly used. Also, we have to specify that it was used in Europe. Of course, other parts of the world were using different languages, like China was using ancient Chinese. And then there was Sanskrit and different languages like Arabic languages.
Because we're European both.
We are European both, and of course we are a bit biased. And yeah, so in Europe at least, and since we both did our academic academic work in Europe, we can relate to this. To
Interesting topic to dive in later, how it was in other parts of the world.
I think it could be very interesting, especially for this Arabic and Indian, like Sanskrit. I saw that there was quite a lot of research done in that languages, and they were later on they were translated. Some of them was translated to Latin, but that's a totally different topic, I guess.
Not for now.
Yes. But it was also interesting that they said that Latin also developed within its own specific scientific bubble. The Latin that the people were speaking was different compared to the language they used in scholars. And also for me, it was quite interesting that they used Latin even when the Latin became extinct language after the fall of the Roman Empire. Then people who were living in different countries, they had to learn, the scholars had to learn. So it creates this boundary for accessibility of science, right? This is something which probably also is right now a big thing for countries where you want to study abroad. You have to learn English. It was the case for me because I'm Polish and I did my master in Sweden. Of course, right now English is much more accessible and we learn it from very early on, but still the university English is again a bit different, right?
Yeah, very different. Yeah, for me, it was the same. I had to learn English first, and I was not very good at English. And then at university, we used both Dutch and English because I'm from the Netherlands. And then when I went to Sweden, everything was English, so I had to adapt quickly.
Yeah. So in Poland, my bachelor degree was in Polish. My first master degree was also in Polish. And we only had like one course in English, which was, I think, like plate tectonics. And I took it like extra credits course. So I didn't even have to take it. I just wanted to take it because I wanted to learn academic
Yeah.
English. And
Yeah.
then I went to Sweden, and I remember I was like scared out of my mind when I had to take the exams in English because, learning, having courses when the professors are talking, okay, you can take notes, you can have time to like put it in your head. But during the exam, when you actually have to use everything in English, that was pretty scary.
Yeah. Yeah. I can only imagine.
I
Yeah.
mean, you don't have to imagine, you went through it.
Yeah, but we had a lot more English growing up and in the early bachelor already. All our books were in English, for example. So
Okay.
at least
Yeah.
your reading was already quite
Yeah.
English
Yeah.
to say.
Yeah. So going back to Latin, um, it's actually quite interesting because Latin lacks definitive and indefinitive articles like the and a in English, which changes how some notions are expressed. And I absolutely love it because I'm Polish. We also don't have articles. And I was like, yes, because this was my always a never ending struggle that I often forget articles when I talk and when I write. Yeah, but Latin was prevailing until like mid 16th century. But then significant amount of printed book in France was in Italian. And then came the transition period in the late 17th to 18th century. And then we have to think names like Copernicus, Kepler, and Galileo. And all of these people were not only printing out their work in Latin, but they were also printing out their work in their own native languages, making the science more accessible locally, but also more fragmented globally. Because when you think about it, okay, it's nice that you can use your own native language to communicate science, but then you make it only accessible for the people in your community, while the scientific findings globally can get lost. And this will become quite important point for like 20th century.
Yeah, it makes sharing science over countries way more difficult if it's not one universal language, but like fragmented, separate languages. Of course, it's better to use or to share with citizens, but I'm not sure if that was the case back then. It's something we are very big on right now to share science with the public. I'm
Yeah,
not sure how it was then.
maybe you can talk about it more, like right now with the policy making, how does it work with languages? How do we deal with it?
Yeah, so most of science is now conducted in English, which is a language most people can understand or learn very easily. And then there's a difference between like academic English, so whatever you write in papers, it's very fancy, formal English. And then the language we speak, well, you and I speak normal English, in which you can also explain science. So it's a bit different. We call it like, yeah, more common scientific engagement with public. And there's also a lot of citizen science going on. So actual, actually not just scientists like working on science, but also involving the public in recording. So you have to be able to explain your language in common English. It's like speaking another separate language that most scientists do not learn,
Yeah, yeah, definitely.
speaking their science in normal English. Yeah.
Yeah. And but what comes after Latin? If you look at it, 18th and 19th century, you can start seeing three main languages coming very distinctively in front. Can you guess which languages will that be?
Well, what was the time period you said? 19,
18th, 19th century.
18, 19. So it's like, I think English is starting to become,
Industrial Revolution, yes,
yeah,
indeed.
exactly. And then we are past the Renaissance, right? So
Yes,
French should be big.
yes. And one more, my
One more.
favorite language.
Well, it should be German then. It's your
Yes, it's
favorite.
German.
Note to the public, it was not her favorite language for a very long time.
For eyes.
Yeah. So many different languages for science then.
Yes.
How does that work?
Yeah, so there's been French been acknowledged as the international standard for Europe. German became a major scientific language for physics, chemistry, mathematics, and medicine. Also earth science. And English was mostly used by engineers, Industrial Revolution, like we talked. It makes sense when you think about the geopolitical situation of the 19th century. There's the modern nationalization, Industrial Revolution, early decolonization movements, and all of these factors encourage the scientists to publish in their own native languages. There have been up to like 20 languages at that point, which were most like recognized scientifically, like Russian was quite big at that time. This is the time when Mendeleev was putting up the periodic table, which
Yeah, so when were we talking about? Like
19th century.
1920?
Yeah.
Yes, maybe one note on the subject. We still use Latin a lot in the scientific community for naming specific species or for plants or animals. They always have Latin names still. So the remnants can be found. It's a dead language, but it's still used.
Yeah. And then there was quite interesting ideas. Do you know that for a while they were considering Esperanto as potential international language of science? I did not know that. I was surprised.
What is that language? Esperanto?
Esperanto.
Oh.
It's a synthetic language. I'm not a linguist, so like I would try to explain it the best I know. This is a language that was invented. They just
For
created
what
from scratch.
purpose? Like for world
Exactly, to
communication?
become a word communication, something which would be the common denominator for a like global community, right? Because back then there were several languages, English and German and French, and then people were like, why not to invent a language which could kind of unite us all?
That
And
almost
they
sounds
thought,
futuristic.
yeah, and they just invent language. It's
Yeah,
kind of
well,
crazy.
Tolkien can do it. Why not anyone else?
They can do it for the purpose of fantasy. Why not to do it for the purpose of
Yeah.
science?
Yeah,
But eventually it did not not go through.
it didn't catch
I
on.
No, there was
Yeah.
some problems with like translating the specific terms and using the scientific structures which we are using and then using it in Esperanto from what I understood. And then, we start drifting towards the First World War. And then we saw a shift in the social mindset, especially about the German scientific language, because this was the time when not only royal family was cutting ties from German roots, but also the science community was changing its own PR and was boycotting German research. And
Interesting.
especially German researchers. Like after the First World War, Germany was not very popular socially. Also academically, it was also noticeable because they didn't want to accept German as a conference language.
I mean, morally, sense, right? But war creates so many great inventions because of the necessities of war,
Yes,
right? So
I
it's
mean,
sad that we cast that away because there are many great things that came from war, even though that's not acceptable to say, obviously.
obviously, war speeds up a lot of scientific inventions, not in the most moral way. And then in 1919, the International Research Council was created to replace the International Association of Academy, and it used only French and English as its working languages. So you can see that already in 1919, German was declining.
German was fully cancelled.
It was definitely cancelled by today's standards. In the Gordon's book, you can have this very nice statistics that in 1932, that's before the Second World War, 88.5% of international scientific conferences admitted contributions in French, 3.5% in English, and only 60% in German. So you can already see the decline of German language from the 18th century to the 20th centuries.
Yeah.
And then the rise of fascism in the 1930s reinforced the status of English as the leading scientific language. And of course, after the Second World War, We have another event which helped to bring up English to its nowadays prevailing role, which is, of course, Cold War and the space race, where a lot of scientists, also from Germany, were working for US.
For influence, it's like it was the same as a war, right? That the race, the necessity for inventing new stuff, it really boosted science in a way.
Yeah, especially the physics. I mean, the atomic bomb, maybe we can talk about it in a separate episode because it's quite interesting. So this is more or less where we are right now, that English is language of science. Of course, there's been quite a few research in Russian, and especially during the Cold War. I mean, you can only imagine. And the space race, both of those countries were just busting their asses off to try to put people on the moon, conquer space. Now comes the question, what next? And in the book, they talk about like computing, like translation using computer. And I guess right now with large language models and OpenAI, maybe this will help people who are not necessarily skilled in languages to access science.
I think especially the AI models are very interesting in translating science into something understandable because they do a generally quite good job in summarizing science. And also at our studies, we learned a little bit about how to work with it to translate your science, if you will, into something people can understand, to find analogies or to, well, make it faster as well to translate your science. So, especially the speed makes it more accessible because otherwise it would take a lot of manpower and hours to make everything well readable. Um, so yeah, it's an interesting time we're living in to make the bridge the gap between science and society, I would say.
Yeah, I think it's also quite important to start bridging this gap because one of the reasons we see such a surge of conspiracy theories is because science became so specific in their language that it became difficult to understand science. When people ask me what I do and I start talking about my work, I think it's super easy to understand what I'm saying. But then, like, I've been told, stop explaining complex problems using complex words. And I think you cannot avoid this if you've been working in the field for 10 years because your common knowledge is not the same as common knowledge of my parents.
Yeah, and it's very hard to crawl into someone else's mind and see what they understand and what they do not. It's really a conversation, an ongoing thing, right? To measure what do you know, how far can I go with my language, what do you understand, what do you do not understand. The target group is very different every time you speak to someone. I think it ties back into the goal of this podcast, right? For us to talk about science and also nerd out and have fun, but also to make science more accessible. At least for me, that's a big goal.
Yes, yeah. So I understand why we use scientific language and jargon in academia to have the precision and clarity to very fast and efficiently communicate with our peers to describe the observation, but this is not needed every day. It was quite interesting for me as an experience to use everyday language when I switched from academia to industry. You don't have this common denominator, which is your science. And then you have to either be very quick in explaining it in normal language without this use of technical vocabulary and passive voice and this evidence-based structure to be more accessible.
Yeah. And I think to add one more hot take before we end this episode, I think only once you can explain it in normal English, you are actually knowledgeable about the subject.
Yes, I totally agree.
Because if you need your jargon, you just don't know what you're talking about, in my opinion.
Yeah. Okay, so that was it for the first take. From Latin through French, German, Italian, almost Esperanto to English. It was pleasure. We're gonna hear each other soon.
Thank you for listening. See you next time.